Members, cease conversations. Representative Panitch is recognized to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues, friends, today I stand before you as the only elected Jewish official in this chamber, asking you to pass HB 30, legislation that I had never imagined would be necessary in Georgia in the 21st century. Sadly, this bill is needed that the Jewish community, which includes my husband, my children, the men and women that I worship with, have the same protections granted to every other religious group in Georgia. Doing so does not advance the cause of any group, it simply ensures protection, nor does it impinge on the rights or interests of any other group. Protections for Jewish people do not come at the expense of anyone else except anti-Semites. The ways in which hate has been brought against the Jewish people are plentiful throughout the ages. But I don't have to reach across the ocean or back into history. Many of you are aware of the hateful flyers that were distributed in heavily Jewish neighborhoods against Metro Atlanta just a few weeks ago. Children who went out to play in their driveways on Sunday morning picked up baggies of hate and asked the questions to their parents, "What is this?" And just over a week ago, various neo-Nazi and white supremacists proclaimed a day of hate for the Sabbath, intending to disrupt worship across the country. And synagogues across the country braced for attacks. We are grateful, at least in Georgia, neighbors and law enforcement stood by us, and these plans did not come to fruition. But others were not so lucky. Just this week, or 2 weeks ago in Los Angeles, 2 Jews were shot leaving their synagogue by a gunman who blamed the Jews for his flunking out of dental school. That man is a member of the same group that left the flyers on my driveway. HB 30 would not stop those flyers from being spread, but would make sure that, God forbid, if someone shot a Jew, they could be used as evidence of their motive. I want to be clear about something because it was brought up and it's incorrect. When this says this is a legally binding definition, if you just read the bill, it actually says, lines 14, anti-Semitism has the same meaning as provided for in the advisory definition of anti-Semitism. This definition is used to discern intent by a prosecutor or investigator only after an act, a criminal act or unlawful discrimination has already occurred. Please understand that. And it's not that difficult if you read the bill. In recent years, in Pittsburgh, in Colleyville, Texas, men came into synagogues with their grievances and their guns. In one case, 11 worshipers were murdered. In another, a brave rabbi and congregants were able to overpower their attacker. Under these circumstances, a bill of this type should be uncontested. It gives our legal system a clear definition of anti-Semitism so that existing anti-discrimination laws, our own hate crime law, can be applied with the most acceptable definition. Just to be clear, just because the hate crime law says it's against religion does not mean a swastika would be considered anti-Semitic. A swastika does not go against my religion. There is nothing in the Torah about a swastika. You need a definition to be able to say that a swastika is anti-Semitic. It's as simple as that. things that you would think would be obvious are not obvious. And I'll get to an example in a moment. But that is all this is. And it has been twisted and contorted into making something it's not. And I don't know why. This should be obvious that calling for the killing or harm of a particular group is wrong, even if they are Jews. That blaming all members of a group for real or imagined wrongdoing committed by a single member of that group is wrong, even if they are Jews. The path of this bill has been torturous. Some claims that you have heard have been that it might stifle speech, or that a definition of anti-Semitism that includes any mention of Israel for use in assessing intent as part of a hate crime conflates two different issues. Unfortunately, those who traffic in hate have already scrambled that egg, and I'm sorry to say that some of my colleagues have been caught up in that. And this bill is our state's best opportunity to restore the distinction between the criticism of Israel, which is completely justified and allowed, and hatred of Jews, which is a wall that has been slowly chipped away. The definition literally says that criticism of Israel, like any other country, is not anti-Semitic. More importantly, this bill does not use a definition to deal with any speech at all. Again, it's only triggered by unlawful action. Our state should not and could not pass a law prohibiting criticism of Israel. But in the last decade, it has become all the more common for hatred of Israel to spill over into hateful language, discrimination, or violence against Jews, and that's what the opponents of HB 30 want cover to be able to do. And I will not give that to them, and neither should this body. In May 2021, when conflict raged between Israelis and Palestinians, a group of men drove to a predominantly Jewish neighborhood in Los Angeles and assaulted 7 diners at a sushi restaurant, shouting, "Free Palestine and death to Jews." The diners were not Israelis, they were Americans. Just last week, prosecutors in New York City found that a pro-Palestinian activist went looking to beat Jews at a pro-Israel rally. Well, last week, in an act of solidarity, a colleague, the gentlewoman from the 89th, introduced her own bill against anti-Semitism, something that I personally wouldn't do to somebody of a marginalized community if I wasn't a member of that community. Nonetheless, our bill, HB 30, does not include a findings section, but her bill does, and I have put it up there. I agree with every word in the section. I want to read it to you for the record because it applies equally to HB 30. The section reads, and we only had one page up, so I'm going to read before it. Anti-Semitism, including harassment on the basis of actual or perceived origin, ancestry, ethnicity, identity, affiliation, or faith, remains a persistent, pervasive, and disturbing problem in contemporary American society. Jewish people continue to be a targeted minority in the United States. Data show, for instance, that Jews are consistently the most likely of all religious groups to be victimized by incidents of hate, and that such incidents are increasing at an alarming rate. State officials and institutions have a responsibility to protect citizens from acts of hate and bigotry motivated by discriminatory animus, including anti-Semitism, and must be given the tools to do so. Valid monitoring, informed analysis and investigation, and effective policymaking require uniform definitions. While there could be, this is the important part, where there could be no exhaustive definition of anti-Semitism, as it can take many forms, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, IHRA, working definition, which is the definition that both HB 30 and Representative Becky Evans' bill used, has been an essential definitional tool used to determine contemporary manifestations of anti-Semitism and include useful examples of discriminatory anti-Israel acts that can cross the line into anti-Semitism. I'll summarize. The definition has been used by our federal government and over 30 governments around the world. recommended for use by the European Council and the European Parliament, endorsed by the Secretary General of the UN and of the UAS, policy guides, over 1,100 organizations have approved it. Thank you to my colleague for your support of IRA. I couldn't have said it better myself. And just to put some meat on what was referenced in IRA and why it's so important, just this week, an activist named Saddam Massoud pled guilty to conspiracy to commit the crimes against Jews. His defense team argued in writing that he had violently assaulted Jewish people on at least 3 separate occasions because he disagreed with the political beliefs about Israel. But in the sentencing submission, prosecutors laid out the actual conversations he had with associates about how to evade law enforcement. He told them, remember, don't chant out Jews. It's the Zionists, to avoid allegation of anti-Semitism. In the words of prosecutors, the veil of anti-Zionism is pathetically thin in this case. But he tried it anyway, in court. That's why we need HB 30. And that's why the IRA examples of when allegedly anti-Israel actions become anti-Semitism. For a long time, Georgians didn't have protection. Georgia was one of the last states to pass a hate crimes bill, and it took too long. The straw that broke the camel's back was the horrific murder of Ahmaud Arbery. 3 men targeted him solely because of the color of his skin. That's the essence of a hate crime. The victim's race, religion, or national origin is the reason for the crime. Violence motivated by hate deserves special attention in our legal system because it is intentionally, specifically targeted at individuals because of their personal, immutable characteristics. As a result, these crimes are very personal, with extraordinary emotional and psychological impacts on the victim and their community. So this is where we get to some of the events that have eluded investigators, which is why we need this definition. This happened in Fulton County Public Schools, not far from here. Beth Gann, a mother, testified at the House Judiciary Committee for what her sons went through until the Department of Education had to step in and threaten Fulton County. For over 18 months, her sons were terrorized with anti-Semitic symbols, finding swastikas on bathroom walls, graffiti stating kill the Jews, gas the Jews, swastikas saying Hitler, doing the Hitler salute in class, and screaming anti-Semitic slurs. It's an experience that still haunts them to this day, and they are still in therapy. Since there was no definition, they were gaslighted and told by numerous school officials that what they were witnessing was not anti-Semitism, that it was not a swastika, it was a symbol of peace, and the graffiti was not anti-Semitism. In matters of law, I know it when I see it is not sufficient. A recent study found that nearly half of all Americans say they do not know what anti-Semitism is. It is not in the interest of justice for all to provide, it is in the interest of justice for all to provide clarity on the bright lines of what is and what is not racism against Jews, to prevent racist acts from hiding behind the shield of geopolitics, and to assure that prosecutors are not tempted to overreach. This bill is not why I came to the legislature. I came to advocate for others, for the well-being of all people in my state. But sometimes life puts us in a particular place at a particular time. If you have read the Bible, and I know you have, today you probably know the story of Purim. There is an attempt to wipe out the Jews from ancient Persia, and a Jewish woman named Esther has found her way into the palace and finds the weight of the lives of her people on her shoulders. She wonders, why me, until her uncle Mordecai tells her in chapter 4, verse 14, "For if you remain silent at this time, Relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for a time such as this. The chaplain this morning said the same thing. Esther takes these words to heart and convinces the king to undo the evil plan hatched against her people. That story is taken as the Jewish holiday of Purim, which is to be observed tonight in about an hour. When my parents named me Esther, they didn't imagine me walking the halls of the Georgia Capitol in the sandal steps of the first Esther. But perhaps, like that first Esther, it is for this moment that I am here. Purim is a celebratory holiday with costumes, cookies, and a commandment to get drunk. Really. But I'm not going to celebrate until we're done here. I'm here to remind us that when tyrants and bigots have arisen through history, they start by targeting racial and religious minority groups, including Jews, but have rarely stopped there. We have a chance to stop it here and now with our votes. Thank you for your time. I ask for your favorable support of HB 30, and in the interest of time, and because I am Queen Esther for tonight, I yield the well.